What's the difference between an account executive who makes $200,000 plus and an AE who only makes their base salary? One sells for a much better company. In this video, we're going to walk you through how to pick the best tech companies to sell for in 2026 so you maximize your long-term career trajectory and make hundreds of thousands of dollars more than you would otherwise and feel more fulfilled in the process. If you're new to this channel, I'm Chris Bussing, and I've worked in tech sales for 10 years at Oracle, Google Cloud, and a late-stage startup, and I've coached hundreds of reps in the industry to land jobs at top companies like Snowflake, Dell, Oracle, and Google Cloud. Not all tech companies are created equal, and picking the wrong company is way more costly than you probably know. So let's walk through how to pick the right companies to bet your career on. So first off, there's 585,000 tech companies in the United States alone. Globally, there's millions. That's a crazy number. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through how to define what good looks like. We're going to define your ideal company profile, and we're going to help you pick that special company that's going to accelerate your career. You got to find the one. First off, when it comes to launching your career, I want you to think in threes. That's how I approached my career at Oracle, Google Cloud, and then a startup, and then ultimately launched into entrepreneurship. What I mean by thinking in threes is treating the first company you work at or even the next one as a 3-year project where you can get in the saddle, you can deliver results, you can turn the company and the opportunity into trade school by sharpening your sales skills that are high leverage that you can take with you for the rest of your career, even as a consultant outside of working for a W-2. And ultimately, you show that progression and you get that promotion. And by showing that staying power over the course of 3 years, not only do you prove to yourself that you can deliver and that you're a top candidate, but also you send signals to the market that you have staying power. And that's something that's different in today's world. So when you do go for an external leap to a different company, you can negotiate with much more leverage to get a higher base salary, on target earnings, and even equity if that's available at the company you're going for. As I said, this is how I personally approached my career, and it turned out very nicely for me. I spent 3 years at Oracle. I got world-class training. I developed a great network with amazing people, and I got that first promotion to account executive and even delivered in 1 and 2 years as an account executive to then launch to Google, a dream company. And then I spent 3 years there, and I got a promotion from inside sales to field sales while at Google Cloud. And then I leveraged those 3 years at Google to launch to a startup where I was a founding seller. And talk about leverage. When I was coming from Google and Oracle, I'd built such a track record, and I negotiated the biggest pay bump that I'd ever experienced in my career with a crazy amount of equity. And I moved to a skyrise on the 18th floor in downtown Austin in a place that was basically on top of a hotel with a rooftop jacuzzi, where if you look back at my YouTube channel, one of my first YouTube videos was doing cold calls from the rooftop jacuzzi without a shirt. And it was cringeworthy. So if you've been following me for a while, for 4 years that I've done this channel, thank you. And you might have seen that. And if you stuck with me, God bless you. I'm not a perfect person, as Hoobastank says in that song. I'm not a perfect person. Anyways, I just got this new microphone, by the way. I hope the audio quality is coming together nicely. And now I feel like I could be a singer, which I probably shouldn't pursue. I should stick to training on tech sales. So anyways, you get the point. What we want to do is avoid a tech sales career sputter where we jump into the wrong company, where we fail, and suddenly that's the signal we show to the market is we become this failure, this job hopper, and we want to avoid that. Think in threes. I also want you to think about chasing meaning over money, especially early on in your tech sales career. There's a book, How Will You Measure Your Life, by Clayton Christensen, who is a Harvard professor that unfortunately passed away, rest in peace, but a great man, and I loved his book. And he talked about a study done by Carl Herzberg, where he discovered this theory called motivation hygiene theory. And what he found is that people who were truly successful and fulfilled in their life long term weren't just focused on chasing hygiene check the box factors like money and status. They were focused on pursuing true motivators, like meaningful work that's challenging, connecting with their peers, aligning to a company that has a strong purpose. So remember to focus on chasing the opportunities where you can really invest in those true motivators. And of course, the hygiene factors of money and status, they will follow. But I would focus, especially early on in your career, on getting into a company that sets you up with those true motivators. Don't make the mistake of being the person caught up on getting 20 to 30K more early on in your career, but choosing the wrong company where you can't fulfill on those true motivators. And not to mention, I need to throw in another factor that you see at the bottom. You want to pursue a company where you can really sharpen your sales skills. Your sales skills are the golden goose of your career that produce your income and that make you invaluable and make you easily hireable regardless of the tech company. And these are the skills that you actually can take into entrepreneurship like I did, where you roll it into coaching and consulting and you're no longer handcuffed to a W-2. So along with pursuing a company where you can invest in true motivators, pursue a company that will invest in you. They will pay you to develop your high leverage sales skills. It's like you turn the company and the opportunity into your trade school to build your sales skills, your trade that you will take with you for the rest of your life. Now, I said we'd define what good looks like, your ideal company profile, and let's walk through some of the most important factors to consider, and then we'll break them down further. First off, location, location, location. Where do you want to live? That's going to inform the types of companies that you apply to. Second off, do you want to sell at a large established enterprise company or at a startup? We'll dig more into the details of how to think about that later. Thirdly, what product category, industry vertical, and line of business do you want to sell into? Next, what are you looking for in terms of company culture and values? And finally, will you be set up for success in the role, and how do you think you'll get along with the hiring manager? Can you see them as being a good mentor for you? Let's dig into each of these. First off, starting with location. Where you want to live is the most important question you need to ask yourself, because where you live, your community has the biggest impact on your happiness and your quality of life. I learned a powerful lesson in my career when I was at Google, and I took a promotion from inside sales to field sales that required me to move to Los Angeles when I had built a great life in Austin and was really happy there. I was so bug-eyed and excited about the chance to be famous in LA, and I thought, you know what, I'm young and single, I have no commitments, let me take a shot. But what I underestimated was the sadness and the loss that would come from giving up the community I'd grown to know and loved. And I underestimated how impactful all the positive habits and the connections I had in Austin were for me and how they shaped my quality of life. So long story short, I moved to LA, not to mention this thing called the pandemic happens and I get locked down and I feel isolated. And I realize I am miserable. I need to make a change. So I actually left Google to join a startup and move back to Austin in a remote role. And it was the best decision I ever made. And what do you know? I'm back to Austin in the community I love at a company where I'm able to grow. And I was happier than ever. And I reached a new level of fulfillment personally and professionally. Now, you might be watching this and you have a family and you're rooted in a specific city. And you're thinking, of course, I can't leave here. Location is going to be the number one factor that drives my decision on where I'll work. Because imagine ZoomInfo has an opportunity, but you have to go to Portland and you need to be living in Boston. So first and foremost, prioritize where you need to live, and that will determine the companies that you apply to. Now, if you're a young person with no commitments and you're not tied down, you might want to consider using tech sales as an opportunity to take you to an exciting city where you can really grow, a city like Austin, Texas, where you can make connections, you can have exposure to many great tech companies, and maybe meet your next foot in the door at the local coffee shop. I think of Ian, who's in our Tech Sales Accelerator community that recently moved to Austin, and he is so excited and he's got the world as his oyster there in Austin. So you get locations important. Let's look at the next factor, remote versus hybrid. Now, remote is great for freedom and flexibility, especially if you're later on in your career. Maybe you have a puppy like I do, and I want to be able to be there with her and give her walks throughout the day. Maybe you're raising kids or you have a family that you want to be able to spend time with. Maybe you have an itch for travel and you want to be able to work from remote settings. And that freedom is really nice, but there's also a trade-off and a cost. When you're at a remote company, you have to be disciplined. You have to be a self-starter. There's going to be temptation to be lazy and not do your work. You're not going to have accountability right there in front of your face like when you're in an office. And also, it's harder to connect with your peers and your company culture. you can just feel more lonely and isolated when you're in a remote role. Especially if you're new to a company or just starting out in your career as an SDR, it's a bit risky when you're joining a company where you're not going to get that direct access to mentorship and consistent support that you would in the office. It's easier to get lost. And that brings me to a hybrid or in-person setup. You will maybe have to commute to work, and there's a cost to that, right? But you could listen to podcasts and things like that to enrich your mind on the way there. And the huge benefit is you're going to connect with the company culture. You're going to connect with your peers, and you're going to build great relationships. You're going to learn faster through mentorship, through osmosis, through the conversations you have in the office, and maybe even being able to listen into the calls of the person in the cubicle next to you. And given it's a designated work environment, it's going to be easier to separate from your personal life and actually focus and lock in when you're at work. And that's definitely been the case for me in my career. And let's be real, top tech companies like Google, which I had the pleasure of working at, have incredible benefits. They've got free food. In the case of the Google office in West 2nd in Austin, we were up in a skyrise and we had Papa Shot and massage chairs and skee ball and video games. And not that you use it all the time, but it was amazing, the amenities. And I think now the office in Austin actually has their own speakeasy for employees. But overall, it's pretty awesome. And working for a top tech company like Google can feel like going to Disney World when you go to the office every day. And it even had me going into the office on weekends sometimes, I have to admit, because of the free food. Anyways, I do kind of miss it a little bit. Now, as an entrepreneur, I'm a bit lonely here, but I do love the remote life as well. So again, the key takeaway looking back is if you're early in your career, I definitely recommend in person to accelerate your growth and connections. And it's actually very valuable experience. But when you're later in your career, like me, where maybe you're a senior seller or you become an entrepreneur, the freedom of remote and that flexibility becomes something that's valuable. And you also are more of a Swiss Army knife and you have more experience where you can handle it. So you got to think about an enterprise company versus selling at a startup. And here's some of the benefits of an enterprise company. And just to cut to the chase and jump to the headline, I think if you're early in your career, you should be investing in opportunities with large enterprise tech companies where they will invest in you. And speaking of investing in you, a company like Oracle, and this was the case for me, is going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in trainers and resources to support you and train you in selling, in their industry, and in their product. And that is going to make you very valuable over time. You're going to build those high leverage skills thanks to the training and all the support you get. And then your stock is going to go up in the market with other companies like Google or AWS or Salesforce that poach from companies like Oracle because they know the sellers they get from Oracle are pre-trained talent that are less risky and more likely to come in and crush it. At a big tech company, you're also going to have a more stable environment. In a downturn, it's less likely that a company is going to lay you off. I remember Google Cloud paid us a bonus or a baseline of our commission in the pandemic when no one was hitting their numbers because they had that kind of resources, which was pretty unique. We didn't have to fear for our jobs. And when you're in big tech, there's less pressure on you as an individual to perform. Although they do expect you to perform, your lack of performance doesn't bring the organization crashing down. And it's easier to just be lost in a sea of people and count on the collective sellers to hit the overall targets. You're also going to have less risk of failure because you're going to receive more coaching, more marketing support, and overall training and resources, as I discussed. And having the brand recognition of working at a company like Oracle, for example, or an AWS is going to make your job as a seller much easier. You can just name drop and it's going to be pretty easy to get meetings with prospects. As opposed to a startup that no one knows about, they're going to be more skeptical to take the meeting with you. Big tech companies provide a clear, structured path to promotion and growth, which is important to show and experience over the long run, not just to feel fulfilled, but to increase your value in the market as you look to pivot to other companies. And you're going to meet amazing people in big tech. I have lifelong friends that I've met and people that I know that went on to become CEOs or authors and entrepreneurs that started with me at Oracle. And hey, that includes myself now as the founder of Tech Sales Accelerator. But big tech isn't all roses. Here are some of the cons. In big tech, it's harder to make an impact. You close $1 million deal, and it doesn't mean as much as closing that size of a deal at a startup. There's also a lot of red tape and politics, and it can be slow to get things done. And these are some of the pain points you're going to experience as you progress in your career in big tech, including realizing that I've gotten promotions, but now I'm being underpaid versus the market. And that's what happened for me at Oracle, where I got promoted to account executive, and I found myself training SDRs coming in at higher base salaries than me, where I only got a small base bump. That's what happens in big tech. You might get a clear path to promotion, but you don't get as big of a pay increase as moving to another company externally. And as you start to develop and grow as a seller in big tech, you might start to hit up on a ceiling. You might feel limited, that you can't express your full talents and contribute at the highest level. You can't express your full creativity, and that might lead you to be pulled to the startup world, which we can dig into now. Let's talk about the pros of a startup. Imagine you are a dreamer and a doer and an entrepreneurial person and creative, and you want to be a CEO of your own company one day. That's a clear sign that you should start out in the startup world, because that's actually the experience that's going to align to your broader North Star vision for your long-term career. Startups are exciting, they're fast-paced, they're missionally driven, and you feel like you can really make an impact. You feel that growth. You really connect with the people you're working with. It can be a rocket ship and an exhilarating experience. At a startup, you're also going to start out with higher pay and have the shot to win huge outsized financial gains through your equity if the company goes public. And you're also going to have a faster path to promotion. You might go from SDR to AE in 6 months or less, where in big tech, it's usually 1 to 2 years. But there's a price to the huge upside of a startup, and that's taking on way more risk than a big enterprise tech company. From the start, there's going to be pressure for you to deliver results. There's going to be high visibility of what you're doing with leadership, and you're going to have less runway to prove yourself before you're kicked to the curb. And you're going to have to work long hours. You're going to have to thrive in ambiguity. There's no playbook. There's not the same support that you get at a big enterprise company. And because you're at a startup, no one knows who you are. You don't have company brand recognition, so it is much harder to get meetings and to deliver revenue for the company. Your job is way more difficult than selling at a Google, where you can get a meeting based at the @google.com email alias alone. And imagine the worst case scenario and the company fails. It runs out of money and you're out of a job and you're out on the street. And there's a high probability this happens because most startups fail. Just look at the statistics. And suddenly that equity you were so excited about proves to just be fairy dust and nothing more. Now, I'm being a bit dramatic talking about the worst case scenario with a startup, but you got to be ready to face that reality. So you got to ask yourself honestly, what am I cut out for? And I have a metaphor for you that I want to share that I'm stealing from Chris Orlob, who's a great podcast guest that I had on in the past. And he said, Chris, are you a barrel or a bullet employee? The barrel employee is self-directed. You can point yourself in the right direction and shoot. And that's the type of person who can be thrown into ambiguity like at a startup and figure it out. They can self-direct. Or are you a bullet employee who needs to be plugged into a gun or a system and directed and shot, and you just execute? That bullet employee is someone who's better suited for big tech at a company like Oracle. Looking back at my career, graduating from Georgetown University with no sales experience, I was a bullet employee starting out, and I'm glad that I invested in the training I got from Oracle. And then even at Google, with the overall support of the company, I started to evolve into the barrel employee to then jump to a startup and really be that Swiss Army knife. So you can start out as a bullet, as I did, and then become a barrel. And I would encourage, again, most people early in their career to consider that big tech company that can point you and just shoot you, and then you can evolve into the barrel over time. Anyways, I'm dragging out this metaphor. Let's get to the next slide, which is finding a strong startup. If you're going to take on the risk of a startup, you have to go in eyes wide open and really do your research. First off, look at the company's financial state. Look at their venture capital funding. If they have a series A, B, or C, that means they have product market fit and they're focused on scaling their business. They have some maturity and they're not too early. Also, look at how recent their last funding round was, which indicates if it was recent that they still have a lot of cash in the bank. They have good cash runway to operate their business and pay for salespeople like you. And look at how much funding in total they've received. Companies that have received millions to 30 million plus in funding are probably in a good financial position. And there are unicorn startups out there that are later stages that have gotten hundreds of millions to billions in funding. Also, look at the company's website to see who their customers are. Are their customers large enterprise companies that have deep pockets? And do they have large enterprise customers across different industries? You want to know if their customer base is large and stable, even in the case of a downturn. Imagine if the company's only selling to tech startups. If a downturn hits like the pandemic, those companies are going to bleed cash, lose their runway, and go out of business. And I literally watched this happen when I was selling at Google Cloud in the pandemic when I was selling to startups. So you've got to be really mindful of who their customers are. And you also want to be mindful of who their leadership is. Do they have a strong vision? And what is their leadership's background? Does the leadership have a proven track record of success in big tech and even as entrepreneurs and in the startup world? If so, that's a green flag to continue to proceed further in the interview process with caution. Because as you're going to hear later, you really do want to go in eyes wide open and vet out these companies, especially if they're a startup. I've worked with sellers like Ren, who started out at ZoomInfo with a great product and overall a good company culture, but she started to feel unfulfilled and called to more. So she took a leap to an ed tech company, an education tech company that aligned with her passion for educating students, where she found herself in a culture where she could thrive, that aligned to her values, with great leadership that she had direct access to, that she could connect with and learn from. I also think of John, who dove into a health tech startup that he really connected with on a personal level because the product provided benefits to senior folks to cover their surgeries that would have really benefited his grandmother who went through cancer and had a really tough go at it. So he had a personal connection to the product. He loved the company mission and culture, and he saw a quick path to promotion as well. And he knew he was a barrel employee that could self-direct and figure out ambiguity, so he dove right in. Now, again, you might be like me, who starts in big tech, gets elite sales training, builds a network, gets experience, and then launches to the startup world. But let's look at the startup dream of what's really possible. Imagine you're chasing market fit for the first 7 years as a company, as a startup, and you become a student of the game as a seller and really an entrepreneur starting out selling for a startup. And you learn directly from the CEO and founders. And the company, they're still trying to figure things out, like the product and the core needs in the market, but you're supporting them in that process as a seller who's boots on the ground, engaging with the market. And you're wearing a ton of different hats. Like you're even doing sales, customer success, marketing, and operations. And that's what I found myself doing in my last startup role before I became CEO of Tech Sales Accelerator. Then imagine from there, assuming the startup continues to progress, you're going from 2 million ARR to 45 million ARR, and maybe a sales leader joins the organization as the company scales, and you become a sales director, which is still an individual contributor role, but you're managing a large territory like the East Coast or the West Coast. Then the next stage, over 2.5 years after that, is you go from 45 million to 98 million ARR, maybe 100 million, and then you go public. You IPO and your equity goes from fairy dust to multiplying in value, building true wealth, and you transition in the process to a VP of enterprise sales, and you make a huge impact for the organization. And maybe the step after that is, with your proven startup sales experience, you've learned so much, you launch into entrepreneurship like I did, and you become a fractional VP of sales or consultant working with other startups to help them scale their own businesses. And as a fractional seller or consultant, you get true freedom to no longer be handcuffed by a W-2, but to work on your schedule, on your terms, still shooting your shot to create outsized financial gains. What an exciting path for the right person. Now let's look at the tech category or vertical you want to sell for. You first want to pick the right industry and product. Does the product interest you, and does it have a vision? Does the industry you'd be selling in interest you? I have to say that cloud, data, and AI are very great waves to ride in the market, where trillions of dollars are shifting in the direction of companies who are riding those waves. But within the cloud space, the data space, and the AI space, you can think through, where you want to impact companies. Do you want to make an impact in healthcare or higher education? You can get creative, but you need to find the right wave and also find an industry that interests you. And then also ask yourself, within this wave of tech sales, this vertical, is the product I'm going to be selling a category leader? And do they have recognitions from G2, Gartner, or other top analysts? You want to bet on the winning horse and not pick a random company in the market that has no recognition where you're playing from behind. You also want to think about financial upside and ask yourself, how money motivated am I? Because if you want to make 7 figures in 1 year and become a true tech sales millionaire, you need to sell for a large enterprise company selling to large enterprises. Now, if you want to follow your passion for mental health and sell a mental health technology to small and medium businesses and psychologists or providers in that space, I'm no expert on that category, and there's smaller deal sizes and they're transactional and you don't have the same upside, but it's meaningful to you, by all means do that. Now, if someone is more broadly just looking to create a life of freedom and impact and make a lot of money, sell in big tech and go for large enterprise tech. That is a great move. Now, you also want to consider, is this product recession proof? You want to ask yourself, is the product a nice to have, or is it critical to enterprise operations across different industries with a clear, verifiable return on investment? You need to be able to speak the language of business value to the CFO, who a lot of times approves the financial investment and even signs the contracts. Solutions like enterprise resource planning software like Oracle NetSuite or SAP, or payroll solutions like Deal or Rippling, or cybersecurity solutions like Rubrik or CrowdStrike, these make a clear business impact. They reduce risk and cost and streamline operations. These are recession-proof companies to sell for. Also ask yourself, who do you want to sell to? What line of business? Do you want to sell to HR and marketing or sales, who are a little easier to talk to? Or do you want to sell complex IT solutions to IT and engineers who can be a little bit difficult? But maybe you're pulled to selling technically complex things which capture your curiosity, but you got to consider the trade-offs between the types of people you sell to. I know a seller who's done great in his career that started in HR tech because he said, who's easier to talk to than HR people? They want to talk to people. They're just like me. It's a walk in the park. Do you want to sell complex technical solutions like infrastructure or developer tools that you really need to study up on, where you need to become more technically dangerous in order to earn technical credibility with your prospect audience? Or do you want to sell a point SaaS solution to HR or sales that really has a refined, simple scope of the business problems they can impact? That could make your life easier, but it just depends on what matters to you. Are you interested in the technical and the complex and to be challenged, or you just want to sell something that's easier to sell? It's your call. Now, you really have to go in with eyes wide open around the company you're applying to and whether they have a strong sales culture. You want to use tools like RepView, where you can get more data around their sales culture and also learn about their sales culture from the inside through networking conversations with sellers at the organization. You want to ask questions like, is the sales culture collaborative and transparent? Is the sales culture about getting results and having a good time doing it? Or is it just a sweatshop that's only transactionally and numbers focused, that's going to ask you to miss your daughter's recital for the sake of the company and closing the deal? You got to ask, what percentage of sellers are hitting their numbers and winning? What is the sales morale? And you can use RepView to find that data, but also talk to a seller at the company to figure that out. Ask yourself, how is sales training and enablement? Is it strong? Are they going to invest in me? Do you get an assigned mentor? What's the promotion path? Can you get promoted within a year to account executive? And is the culture diverse and inclusive? If that's something important to you, which I'd recommend, you do want to be in an environment where you can be exposed to diversity of perspective and experience, because it's going to help you grow as a person. And I need you to understand this one. Your manager will make or break you. You could be at a company like Google with a great culture, with a great product, and you're in an awesome overall environment, but suddenly your experience goes from rosy to cloudy and miserable because you have a bad manager. And in fact, that was part of the reason why I left Google and went to a startup, because people ask me why I left Google all the time. It was because my manager and I, although he wasn't a horrible person, we didn't really see eye to eye, and that really impacted my experience. So especially in your interview process, go in with eyes wide open and ask yourself, can you see the manager as someone who you'd look up to as a mentor and who you could learn from, who could actually support you in your career? Can you see them as someone who will push you to grow and have your back? And what steps has the manager taken to create a positive team culture and invest in their people? And that's a question that you should directly ask the manager yourself in the interview process. Now, before I show you some tools on how to find great companies that fit your ideal company profile, I want to emphasize the SDR versus AE dynamic, because sometimes people come to me and say, I've got a doctorate or this degree, and I want to jump the SDR role to account executive, and I want more money and status. But remember what I said about true motivators versus hygiene factors, and how it's important to focus more on meaningful opportunities and developing high leverage skills. So I would say it is a mistake to jump over the SDR role where you're missing out on developing the prospecting skills that are going to be the golden goose of your career. Find an SDR role at the right company to lower the barrier of entry to getting into that company. Some of the best CEOs initially swept the floors of the retail operations they ran. You've probably heard that metaphor, but it's a real thing. Why not learn the business from the ground up to be the best seller at a high level and best eventual leader possible? You started from the bottom, and the best leaders that I respect the most, they did start from the bottom and work their way up. You'll get invaluable learnings. You'll build confidence with less pressure. And as I said, the prospecting skill is something that's going to separate you even as an account executive and even as a founder of your own company, as has been the case for me as the CEO of Tech Sales Accelerator, where I continue to prospect for my own clients. Also, be wary that in this economic climate, the first to go are the account executives who aren't delivering. So if you jump into the fire, it's pretty risky if you don't deliver. And finally, as an SDR, you get to go in there with less pressure and get a lay of the land, not just around how to sell at the company, but you'll learn about the internal politics and the best potential territories to navigate to, and you'll figure out how to build the best relationships to get the best account executive role possible. And that's what happened with me at Oracle when I was able to crush it as an SDR and build relationships network and figure out I wanted to go to a specific territory in their national tech business unit where I covered AAA and SunGuard availability systems, great companies. And I went on to hit my number halfway through the year, taking 2-hour lunch breaks. That was because I didn't just jump to any AE role, but I got in on the inside at the lower level and was able to be strategic to get to the right AE role that set me up to crush it. All right, so let's walk through some tools that you can use. I mentioned one of them before, RepView, to find the right companies for you. So first off, we've got RepView. It says sell for a company you love, and they've got great data to look at different companies, and you can explore companies and look at rankings, and you can see best companies to sell for by location based on the city you're in, based on small size, mid-size, and large companies. I definitely recommend larger companies. Best companies to sell for by rating category. And notice RepView rates companies based on their overall sales orgs, their professional development, their culture and leadership, product market fit, inbound lead opportunity flow, incentive compensation structure, and diversity and inclusion. So RepView gives us even more evidence on how to find a great company and criteria that we should be considering. So best companies to sell for by funding. We talked about that earlier if you're going to a startup. So how great is that? You can even compare different companies that you can see that, oh, Snowflake has a little bit of a better rating than Salesforce. Interesting. And you can start to dig into it. Now, you do have to fill out a survey or rate a company that you've worked with either currently or in the past to then get access, but you can easily get access to all that info. And you can look for sales jobs here, all types, SDR, BDR, account executive, account manager, even customer success and sales engineer. You can see salary breakdowns, which can actually, salary by role will help you negotiate effectively when you go into a role and the recruiter asks you what your pay expectations are, and you're able to say, based on the market, I have an idea, but ultimately you want to put it on them to hear their range, but you can have legs to stand on in your negotiation. And yeah, you can really find some great opportunities here and ultimately look at companies to see what their overall scores are, and how their culture is, how many reps are hitting attainment, and all the factors that we looked at before. Now, another resource is the Forbes Cloud 100. Cloud computing has changed how businesses operate, and all these SaaS companies, they run on cloud infrastructure. They are cloud companies. So the Forbes Cloud 100 shows the top cloud companies in today's modern world, and you're going to see some great standout companies. And any of these companies would be great companies to bet your career on. So, of course, you see the AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic. You see Stripe for payment processing, Databricks. I would totally work for Databricks in the data lakehouse space. Canva. I actually use Canva to design this deck. You've probably heard of Ramp, the great fintech company. Navan, expense management. Anysphere, Deal. We talked about Deal. My boy Trent Dressel, shout out to Trent. My good friend is over there. Payroll, they are needed in the market. Notion, I use Notion for my business. Grammarly, Celonis, Grafana Labs, Netscope, Gusto, Rippling, Tanium, Miro. You get the point. You can look at 100 different companies. It's a great resource. Now, you can also go to Built-in. Look at Built-in. You can search for different companies here. You can look for remote companies. Let's see here. You can look for office type, industry size, all filters, and you could see hybrid, industry, analytics. That's a good space. Okay, let's just see what we're getting. SciPlay. Okay, interesting. Ad tech. Lowe's. That's kind of random, but if you sift through, you can actually find some good companies even in your local area, like in Austin. We've got topstartups.io, where you can look up companies to apply to and find great new exciting startups if you want to take the startup path by HQ, size, stage, industry, when they're founded, investors. You can use some of the eyes wide open criteria that I mentioned. Like you want to find a company with recent funding, a good amount of funding at a certain series A, B, or C or later. You can use these factors to find a good group of startups. We've got Prospect, which on the company directory tab, you have to log in, but they show some really good startups that you could bet your career on, that it's based on venture capital data. These companies, it mentions exit risk. What's the risk that they don't go public? Oh, very low, meaning Stripe has a high probability of going public. And it talks about their industry, and it shows flags on why they're a great company. Like Stripe, for example, has over $3 billion in net revenue, I think it says. Anysphere has ARR, annual recurring revenue, of $48 million, up 12 times since April. Anduril has over 100 million in revenue. These are great signals, and it gives some insight, and you just need to log in and create a free account. But one other tool you can look at is Crunchbase. Let's see, you got to verify you're human, but find me top late stage startups to sell for. I actually don't know how this is going to work. But let's see what it does. Crunchbase has venture capital or funding data as well, where you can find great startups that have a good backing and learn more about them. But it looks like the AI, oh, cool. It said Anthropic, Suno, Replit, Harness, Harvey, and you can start to click into them and you can see, about the company's growth, their ranking, predictions and insights, financials, people, and all this great stuff, guys. So what you want to do ultimately is you're the CEO of your own life, including your tech sales career journey. And as the CEO, you want to do your due diligence and make sure you're investing your time, your energy, and your resources into the right places to maximize your success, not just for you, but for others. And I'm going to say this, regardless of where you're at in your journey, whether you're trying to break into tech sales for the first time, or you're an SDR trying to get promoted to AE, or you're an SDR trying to get a better role at another company, maybe even upgrade to AE at another company, or an AE who realizes I'm not in a very good company, let me get to a better company. I want you to consider booking time with me at my Calendly link, linked in the description of this video, for a career strategy session, and to consider working with our Tech Sales Accelerator programs, which have launched careers with people around the industry, like Max, who got into Rubrik, Tony, who pivoted from Workday as an account executive to a much more exciting startup rocket ship with a ton of inbound leads, or Alex, who got into Snowflake, became number one of 130 SDRs, and then pivoted to Confluent at 195K OTE, all within 1.5 years of transitioning from being a loan officer. Or I think of Nick, he's out there over at Splunk and he's number one in his organization. And I worked with him to help him become number one. He was number two. Well, he became number one. And now I and Tech Sales Accelerator are in his corner as well to help him pivot to a better opportunity if he ever wants to upgrade. So guys, if you're ready to take your tech sales career to the next level and find the place to really grow, then book some time and I look forward to seeing you in a call. Make sure to leave a comment with any topics you want me to hit on in the future, any of your own perspective and wisdom from your experience in tech sales, or even in the process of pursuing a role in tech sales, because regardless of where you're at, you probably have a lot that you can share with us. And I want to get this community firing on all cylinders and really engaged. And thank you for being a part of this growing community, by the way. I left my W-2 in tech sales to go all in on building this YouTube channel, this podcast, and Tech Sales Accelerator. I appreciate it and wishing you all the success in tech sales and in life. Happy selling and happy living. And I'll see you in the next one.